Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan, and the topic I chose to do my presentation on is the macronutrient profiles of long distance runners across different skill levels. The learning objectives and the importance of this is to explore how macronutrient requirements and consumption patterns vary among long distance runners of varying skill levels. And the importance is understanding these differences is crucial for optimizing performance, recovery, and overall health in endurance athletes. So start off here, I put together a graphic that shows that the key message is that nutrition is not just fuel. It's a performance tool, a recovery strategy, and a long-term health protector. Diving more a little into it here, I have fuel's performance, and the primary energy source, of course, is going to be carbohydrates, which is very important. And this is the primary energy source during prolonged high-intensity efforts, and inadequate fueling leads to early fatigue, which is like hitting the wall, and glycogen depletion is directly linked to impaired endurance. Of course, as I previously mentioned, it enhances recovery. That's where protein comes in. Protein supports muscle repair and immune function, and immune function post-run. Moving on here to maintaining energy balance. Prevents low energy availability, which can lead to hormonal imbalances, decreased bone density, menstrual dysfunction, and this just supports overall health and performance longevity. Here it supports cognitive and mental function, and of course promotes adaptation to training, which is key for athletes. Adequate protein promotes muscle synthesis and mitochondrial biogenesis, and nutrient periodization optimizes adaptation and reduces injury risk. So this slide is a quick overview of macronutrient functions in endurance sports. So basic overview is that carbohydrates are the primary energy source during endurance activities and delays fatigue and replenishes glycogen. Proteins are essential for muscle repair and recovery, and fats are going to be able to support long duration energy needs and hormonal functions. So here I believe it was important to put was ACSM and ISSN macronutrient recommendations and guidelines for endurance athletes. Here they had carbs at 6 to 10 grams a kilogram a day, up to 12 kilograms for ultra distance. Protein, they had 1.2 to 2.2 grams per kilogram a day. Fat, they recommended 20 to 35% of your total calories for comfort fat, or about a gram per kilogram a day. So I think it was important to note these, since these are widely recognized, societies, and very popular in exercise science, exercise physiology world. A critique, I'd say, is they follow a one-size-fits-all assumption. And essentially, these guidelines, they often offer broad macronutrient ranges without clear differentiation, based on sex status, event types, so whether it's a 5K, which is considered long distance, or an ultra marathon or a marathon. And of course, environmental stressors are not really taken into account, like heat, altitude. And a result of this is that it may lead to over or under fueling nuanced training environments. So it's a little too broad. So I think it's important to you can't mention elite endurance athletes without the success of Kenyan and Ethiopian runners in distance running. And this is attributed to a combination of factors, including a strong running culture and, of course, the training at altitude. These two countries, they produce many elite world-class athletes. So, for example, here on the left, here's Eliud Kipchoge and Kelvin Kiptum. These are two Kenyan athletes, and they're known for breaking the world record for the fastest men's marathon times. If I believe Kelvin Kiptum was under 2 hours, or just about under 2 hours. While on the right, this is Tigst Asifa of Ethiopia, and she holds the women's world marathon record, which she set at the 2023 Berlin Marathon. So the reason I mention this is to compare. There's a study showing that Kenyan athletes' diets and the Ethiopian diets. So the Kenyan athletes' diets met typically the macronutrient recommendation for endurance athletes, and especially in carbohydrate and protein intake, but their fluid intake was below the recommended levels and had poor hydration. Unlike the similar studies in Ethiopian athletes, they maintained energy balance and stable body mass, and highlighting the distinct nutritional practices for world-class athletes. So if you look here, I know the ACSM, ISSN mentioned 6 to 10 grams per kilogram of carbohydrates specifically for endurance athletes. Here, the carbohydrates for the Kenyan athletes are a little bit over 10 grams. Carbohydrate 9.7, so they're pushing that upper limit stated by ACSM and ISSN, so which is significant to see. And for the protein, here they're not as high as like a bodybuilder, of course, or someone looking to gain muscle. Specifically for their needs, they're trying to. It makes more sense to stay in that range of the 1.3, and here they're at 1.8 grams per kilogram of protein. So, not to jump ahead, but these are, based on current research, these are the current macronutrient intake for the following skill levels. It's important to note when looking across skill levels is that the elite and the D1 runners have higher weekly mileage, and of course multiple training sessions per day and greater caloric and carbohydrate requirements just due to the nature. And then while the recreational runners have lower volume, often train just once a day or every other day, and their carbohydrate intake often is insufficient, leading to early fatigue. So of course the recreational runners, their macronutrients are going to be less than the elite runners and the D1 runners. And to clarify, elite runners a lot of times is referring to just Olympic level athletes, not specifically in college, but such as like Kelvin Kiptum, Eliud Kipchoge. They're not in college, but they are world-class athletes. And here you can see the protein, carbs, and fat, and the percent of fat total per kcal. You can see the highest for carbohydrates, 8 to 12 grams is the range. For collegiate, it's at least 6 to 10. And recreational is 3 to 5 grams per kilogram for carbohydrates. And basically, from recreational to elite, all the values go up. So right to left is increasing for each macronutrient, as you would expect. Here, this slide shows the direct effects of carbohydrate intake on performance, and these shows studies highlighting its importance. So, for example, here the Burke the Burke study, shows elite. It showed elite distant runners, which is from about 10 kilometers to marathon level, and the protocol was that for 7 days they carbohydrate loaded. They followed a protocol which was 10 grams a kilogram a day, and this was before a 30-kilometer time trial. The result was of the performance improvements. They were 3% faster in the 30-kilometer time trial. And the explanation for this could have been a higher glycogen stores and delayed fatigue and enhancing, their finishing pace. And ultimately, a key performance indicator was that it improved sustained pace and end race surge. The Betts and Williams study was on D1 trained university runners, and the protocol consisted of consuming 1.2 grams a kilogram of carbohydrates every hour post-run during a 4-day high-volume training. So the result was that, of course, the improved performance in a 5K run on day 5 was maintained over 5 days. And this was explained, of course, by effective glycogen resynthesis, enhanced recovery, and preserved performance. The key performance indicator of this is maintained performance over consecutive training days, which is, in the athletic world, that's great. It's key. For the Hawley study, this focused on recreational endurance runners, and the protocol consisted of 6 grams a kilograms a day of carbohydrates for 3 days prior to 90-minute sub-maximal treadmill run. The result was an improved time to fatigue by about 20 minutes and a lower rate of perceived exertion. And the key performance indicator of this is that, greater running economy and the RP, which is the reduced perceived effort, which is good. And finally, this Lieberman study took into account individuals in the military, which military endurance individuals, so it's of all levels. They it classified as. So the finding was that carbohydrate ingestion during prolonged endurance activity, it preserved reaction time and decision making accuracy under fatigue. So the carbohydrate protocol was carbohydrate during exertion, and this was especially relevant for tactical pacing and strategic surges in races. And the KPI is maintain mental focus and pacing strategy execution. Here, elite endurance athletes or Olympic level marathoners or elite 10-kilometer runners typically demonstrate more strategic and periodized nutrition habits. But of course, gaps still exist, especially under high training volumes or travel periods. If we look specifically at carbohydrates, their typical intake was 6 to 12 grams per kilogram. And of course, since elite runners often periodize carbohydrate intake, and high carbs on interval days and low carb on recovery days, high carb availability is linked to better time trial performance and faster race splits. Once again, high carbohydrate availability was linked to better time trial and faster race splits, which is important to note. Now for protein, elite runners tend to optimize protein timing, especially post-run. And then for fat intake is typically well managed to avoid displacing carbohydrates, of course, which is key. And they focus on unsaturated fats, which is good, good fats. Now in the trend with the collegiate runners, a common concern for collegiate runners was the low energy availability. This occurs essentially when energy intake is insufficient to support both exercise energy expenditure and normal physiological functions. This is prevalent to Division I runners, and studies estimate about 36 to 58% of female and up to 25% of male collegiate endurance athletes may be at risk for low energy availability. The contributing factors for this was high training volumes and inconsistent fueling. Of course, they have 2-a-days, 3-a-days, early morning practice, and the multiple sessions a day definitely got to them. And of course, the poor dietary habits and nutrition knowledge, of course, skipping meals, fear of weight gain, and of course, the biggest, arguably, key one was the low carbohydrate intake. Low carbohydrate intake below recommended levels is one of arguably the biggest factors that led to lower energy availability in these collegiate runners. Here we are looking at macronutrient intake trends in recreational runners. So protein intake often exceeded 1.6 to 2.2 grams a kilogram a day. And the impact is that it may displace carbohydrate intake and protein alone, and it doesn't fuel endurance performance effectively, essentially. And then for fat, the fat intakes range from 35 to 45% total kcals, exceeding that 20 to 35% recommended value. And the impact of this fat range is that it displaces carbs, once again, which are crucial for moderate to high intensity running, and it's also poor adaptation to higher intensity effort. For carbohydrates, they were frequently underconsumed, and because of course, given the nature of how carbs are viewed, and the keto diet and all that, of course, in that study has found that compensatory overuse of fat, protein for energy, and essentially it's found that a lot of people just wanted to consume more protein, thought it was healthier. Basically, protein has great marketing, and so of course they're trying to meet their protein requirements, and as runners, really it's important to get there, but it's also just as important, if not more, is getting that carbohydrate intake. So here are some practical applications based on this PowerPoint presentation. Of course, want to tailor macronutrient intake based on individual needs. Everyone's different, so it's of course recognizing that and knowing how to fix to your needs, and adjust carb intake according to training intensity and duration, of course, ensuring adequate fat and protein intake to support overall energy availability, which is key for runners, and of course monitoring body composition to identify potential nutritional gaps and to optimize performance. So here I think it's important to note, especially in sports nutrition research, that a lot of the studies, I guess, are tailored to men. So a lot of studies are conducted on men, of course, and these results are assumed to be the same for women. And then in much of the studies involving women athletes, they are just regarded as just smaller men, and they kind of just, shift that guidelines for them, I guess, in research. And then this just leads to, more generalized recommendations that often don't suit women. Biologically, men and women are built different and have different needs nutritionally. Of course, women have distinct physiological characteristics that entail tailored approaches to training and nutrition. And I think it's important to understand, or be aware of at least, that much of the current research for developing exercise and nutrition protocols that align with women's physiological needs, a lot of it is just modified male-based guidelines. It's not a lot of the women's exercise research is kind of overlooked or just not there. I think that's just worth important noting. And then here on this side, based on the information in the presentation, here I created an athlete macronutrient needs calculator. They'd note their training load and primary goal, and then also based on their height and weight, they'd be able to see their target intake of grams per day for each macronutrient. And this is all on the left. And on the right here, I used myself as an example. I used my real information, and it's all filled. And then based on I was able to see my target intake per day. So currently I am training for a marathon, and I'd say my training load right now is typically moderate. Busy schedule, please don't blame me. And my primary goal is, not trying to lose any more weight, and it's kind of hard to gain weight while running this much, so it's just to maintain. I weigh 78 kilograms, about 6 foot, and then based on this, I was able to put it in this table I created, and my target intake would be 546 grams of carbs a day, 140 grams of protein about, and then within that range, 78 grams of fat a day. And once again, this is based on me personally, so moderate training and just my goal of maintenance. And of course, this could be adjusted, based on training intensity, recovery, and day-to-day basis. On this slide here, I have a short quiz, so just pause it when you're ready. And the next slide will be the answers. Here are the answers, and here are my references. And thank you so much.